Method to the Madness with the wonderful speakers we have today with us. Thank you all for making the time to join us. I would like to introduce our guest speakers today. I'll start always with the ladies. Venetia Bell, she is the Group Chief Sustainability Officer for GIB and the Head of Strategy for GIB Asset Management. She has a lot of experience with the Bank of England in the previous life. She's also one of the young global leaders with the World Economic Forum. Next to her, we have Seb Henbest, who is the Global Head of Climate Transition at HSBC. In a previous life, he was leading Bloomberg NEF before joining us. Next to him, Vijay Bains. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Group Emirates NBD. He has done all the big fours. I think 3 out of 4 is your track record.
3 or 4.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm saying something in the future. And to the right, there is Alex Mishi, who is the Central GFund Secretariat and ED for mobilizing capital to emerging markets and developing markets. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the time. So I have to say that we're also broadcasted live. So, smile to the camera, please. Thank you. And I wanted to start this discussion. As I said, it is a very wide subject, what financial institutions can do to build capacity. And it sits at the center of all the discussions. I have to say, when I saw the subject, I was a little bit overwhelmed myself. Where do we start? Where do we continue? And where do we end with this subject? But the reality is, I was reading yesterday McKinsey's daily wrap-up, and they said there is a $41 trillion financing gap for the mitigation up to 2030, and there is another 600 billion required financing adaptation. So that means it's our job collectively here to make sure we finance this. So I want to check that although we know the demand is there, what do the banks and other financial institutions, because it's not just the banks, we have an ecosystem here, do to facilitate this transition? So I'll start with Vijay. And I wanted to ask a very wide question, if you want. How do banks effectively integrate sustainability principles into the core business strategy? I know you came to Emirates NBD 11 months ago. Where did you start? how did you convince your senior management, your board, and everyone at Emirates?
And again, it's a real privilege to be here with you all as well. I think we started with the business and kind of estimating the size of sustainable finance and transition finance, because that's what's as well. So we looked at actually what other banks are committed to. We looked at our own appetite for sustainability loans. We spoke to our clients as well and say, what can we do better? What have we already done for you? And where's the trends going? And actually, we also spoke to the MOCI, the central bank as well, to look at actually what was coming up as a result of COP. We could see the transition really kind of gathering pace as well. So that dictated our strategy, and hence why we then went to launch our sustainable finance framework, which I can do a gentle plug with HSBC, and HSBC with ING and Emirates MBD really support us and absolutely fantastic partners with ING. There you go, I have to say that as well. But that actually gave us a framework for sustainable finance and Islamic sustainable finance. And that was really important for our relationship bankers and managers as well. I've been a profit, which keeps us all happily in jobs, but actually we need to translate that for relationship managers. Transition bond, and a climate bond, and a green bond. What are the KPIs that ICMA is evolving into as well? So we've been on quite a transformative learning journey as well. And that started from our board, through to our board risk committees, through to our ExCo, and then our bankers as well. And actually, everyone's on a journey with sustainability. Everyone's got an opinion of sustainability as well, in their own heart as well. But actually applying and what sustainability means as a risk officer or as a relationship manager is incredibly different as well. So actually we've been on kind of a journey and a kind of lunch and learn with each of our teams and our divisions to explain that as well. Also, sustainability is different in different geographies. We, like HSBC, have a global footprint as well. And different nation states have different commitments. So actually making sure we're right sized for the appetite in that market has been absolutely key. And then finally, continuing the engagement as well. For us, we're not a COP28 team, we are a sustainability team as well. Amazing to galvanize action, and we've seen just so much activity in the last week. I think I've seen yourselves at HSBC, I think 45 times in the last 2 days, which is amazing. And we'll see you guys another few hundred times. It's fantastic to raise a profile of sustainable finance. And for me, I spoke about it as well, as I train as an environmental scientist, this is my 16th COP. But this is a COP where I've seen business really take the center stage on deal making. It's incredible to see as well, because it's at the highest level of all of our ExCo's priorities as well. I'll pause right there.
50 of the other subjects I want to raise already, so thank you very much for this. Very interesting insights, especially from more financing-led perspective. Venetia, how has been your experience? Because the journey for GIB started from your asset management arm. Is there any difference in how you approached it and then expanded to the wider group?
So, thanks, Olga. That is a rookie error, but now it is working, so that's excellent. So, yeah, as Olga said, our journey was a little bit different. So I joined GIB's asset management business about 5.5 years ago. And there it was a very traditional index-led business. And my remit coming in was essentially to work with the CEO to build a fully sustainable asset management business out of London for the GIB group, which we did. And we launched a bunch of sustainable investment strategies, funds, with a view to mobilizing capital in support of sustainable development. And then we realized that really the same transition needed to happen on the banking side. So if you look across the industry, traditionally, the asset management areas have been further advanced than the banking parts of the business when it comes to integrating sustainability. You see that with the growth of the UN Principles for Responsible, further advanced than the banking parts of the business when it comes to integrating sustainability. You see that with the growth of the question of what is material for the bank. Is you will often banks talk about their amazing targets for emissions reduction for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Great, fantastic. I fully applaud that. We have done exactly the same, but that is not material for a bank. For a bank, materiality is through the financed emissions. And so that guides your approach to thinking about your sustainability strategy, and hence setting your targets and your approaches and all of that strategy in the organisation, and hence very much externally focused in terms of the services that we provide to clients. I think there's just one exception to that, which is we need people. Yes, this is about the climate, but it's about the impact on the people. And this is also how we drive the transition. And so for me, this is about the climate, but it's about the impact on the people. And this is also how we drive the transition. And so for me, it's very years about things that they want to change, products that they want to develop, initiatives that they want to drive into my grand picture of what is a material strategy for us as a bank. But it's so important, because that's how I manage to build momentum for the organisation and to try to make the difference that we all want to have.
Very good point. And that's how you get fellowship, I guess, across the organization, which is very important to deliver. Seb, moving on to the transition planning process, which I have to say, as another HSBC employee, it sits at the center of everything we do, and that's how you grow fellowship, I think, within HSBC, fair to say. Can you share a little bit of your experiences so far?
And it's difficult because, as you said, this only really works if we can embed it in core business. This can't be an adjunct process that sits alongside what folks do every day. And in doing so, we need to upskill a whole bunch of people. We need to build the right frameworks, and all these and companies all over the world doing everything. And therefore, our emissions profile is very deep and very wide. And if we can embed net zero transition in what we do every day, then the whole institution can help deliver that. So that's a really important thing. This needs to be sort of core, and we need to build the processes so that it's just day to day, it's core business, it's the way of working, ends up helping to push in this direction. In terms of client transition planning, fundamental to achieving that outcome is for each of the bankers in the organisation who are working in the sectors and the geographies where this is material, and materiality is really important. Not everyone in the bank needs to live and breathe this every day, but there are critical parts that do. It means that the client transition planning process or assessment process that we've developed needs to ensure that each one of the relationship bankers understands the transition of their client, which means that we can't, again, do this in sustainability separately. It's got to be part of their journey as well. If you think about the broader framework of what we need to build, if you start at the very sort of top of the ambition, so okay, we've set ourselves net zero targets for 2050. We can translate them into near-term targets, 2030 targets, and we can split that by sector. And we do that because it's a different transition pathway by sector, by geography, but we can start to define what we need to see us to be 0 degrees by the transition of our clients. So we can use that to put each client somewhere on a spectrum, from those that are most aligned to the targets that we've set, to those who are just starting out. And in the process of doing that, we can help ourselves to build the engagement strategy that is necessary for us to achieve our goals. Because, as we've said, for the bank to achieve its net zero objective, its clients have to go on that journey, and we have to support that transition. And once we can identify where they are, we can build the strategy. And this has to be a commercial strategy. It can't just be a risk management strategy. And so the other really key thing beyond embedding this in core business is that we embed it on both sides of both sides of the bank. If you think it needs to be embedded in the risk function so that we can manage all the risks associated with transition, but it also has to be embedded in the frontline banking team. So when we look at the transition of our clients and look at where they are in detail, we have to identify risk, but also build that commercial strategy. How do we do good business as we support their transition? Where are the opportunities that we can see? And to help us to do that, we can set ourselves some policies to create some rules of engagement. But maybe the last point I'll make in terms of what we've learned is we have to transition very quickly. And therefore, we need to upskill ourselves very rapidly. And the reason I'm sitting here is I was brought into the bank 18 months ago. Net zero technology, net zero transition pathways by sector, so industry leverage that internal knowledge, that in-house expertise to help us to navigate this pathway, because there's not one path to net zero by sector, by geography. There are multiple paths, and we have to be sensitive to that. So when we're building our commercial strategies, we have to think, what is the best path for this client in this position from this starting point? How do we do good business with them and support them on that journey? But we also have to be able to kick the tires, and we have to be able to call out things that don't make sense. We have to do the numbers. And so this central team is there to help us to do that and to upskill quickly so we can move quickly, because we've set ourselves pretty ambitious targets by 2030, and we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much. And I think it is a push and pull discussion, correct? Because we want our clients to have transition plans. We want us to be compliant with our targets as well. So we have to work on both sides of the equation. Now, the problem is that I read some Accenture research that says that out of the top 2,000 largest companies in this world, only 40% of them have a transition plan currently. So, Alex, coming to you, I just want to understand how initiatives like GFunds and what you have announced also during this COP, like the Global Capacity Building Coalition and the Net Zero Data Public Utility can help us upskill both the clients and us as financial institutions and bring a little bit more momentum in the change.
Absolutely. I think the first thing you need is commitments, and that's what GFunds sought to do under the COP.
Momentum in the change.
Absolutely. I think the first thing you need is commitments, and that's what GFunds sought to do under the COP president. High percentage of companies around the world have transition plans at the moment. Not surprising to me, because I think that it's all about this. It's a strategic, company-wide, board-approved, CEO-led strategy, transformation strategy. It's not just some kind of side commitment that the CSR puts out. It's really a top-level document that it's about transforming how your business works. I mean, Venetia's point's absolutely spot on about Scope 3. I mean, when people talk to me, banks talk to me about Scope 1 and 2, I just say I'm not really interested, because it's less than 0.1% of their emissions by some measures, less than 0.1%. So it's all about finance emissions, and that is the bank's core business, right? So it's really a strategic, transformational document. Citigroup published a net zero transition plan using our guidance, and some of the smallest financial institutions in the world do it as well. So banks, insurers, pension funds, stock exchanges. So it's really, the framework is now there, and there's an implementation challenge. Well, there's actually several implementation challenges. One is data. As you said, the data is not good enough. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start. You absolutely have to start, because that production process is what produces and improves the data. So for the data to be there, you need to be disclosing. Everyone needs to be disclosing. We need to be iterating and improving over time. So that's one thing I would say is, like, the first transition plan anyone puts out is not going to be perfect. And they should still put it out even though it's not perfect. And that's why it's important that we have safe harbors, because we're in quite litigious times. And it's really important that these things start getting disclosed and put out. So if you're a regulator, you're all accessing the same, then that's a huge undertaking on the back end, from a technological perspective. It's also a huge political undertaking, because even people can disclose in line with the greenhouse gas protocol, but choose different bits of it. So creating that data model that makes the data that we're looking at comparable. The Amanda Blanc, the Viva CEO, the transition plan framework that we delivered last year, and don't have training resources in your native language. You don't have a budget to hire a McKinsey or an Oliver Wyman to come in and help you. So there are a lot of offerings out there, But we did structured interviews with financial institutions in emerging markets and developing countries and said, why aren't you doing a climate report, TCFD disclosures? Why aren't you doing a transition plan? Why aren't you doing setting science-based targets? The number one response was capacity. At the same time, we had funders coming to us being like, can you run a increased adaptation finance? They will know where to go. And similarly, those looking to fund that type of activity philanthropically or don't will have a better repository of what's already happening. So I think that's a really important initiative. It will take a while to really get going, but I think that's going to be a massive development for the global financial community over the next few years.
Thank you very much. And I have to say that I don't know if it was because we are preparing for COP all year long, but a lot of us in this panel have engaged a lot with the financial institutions, both banks and non-bank FIs, just amplifying some of these messages. And
in the GCC region. Having said that, actually, many of our largest corporates have already been, and to your point exactly, they've been on this journey, actually, because many large corporates own European and American businesses. Well, we're doing a lot of work with them translating Transition Plan Task Force, translating what JET-P plans mean for their country as well and their industries. And that is gathering pace as well. We are really mindful of transition finance products as well. I think we spoke earlier as well around particularly scope-free emissions. So we've measured our scopes 1 and 2, which, as you said, you can kind of predict it before you go into it. It's a few 0.2% for us. Scope-free finance emissions, we've done an incredible amount of detail as well. We've used PCAF and GHG protocol data, but again, as we've all said, data scarcity is really challenging. So what we're trying to do is provide a database for our SME clients, for our clients to say, this is what we believe your emissions are from your size, your location, and actually this is where you guys are at, and this is where your commitments are taking you. So we've always become advisors as well as financiers in regards to transition and sustainable finance, and that's a really great privilege, but with that comes a lot of responsibility as well. And there's much explaining what's good for them from a finance point of view, as well as kind of from a sustainability point of view. And often it's, we need to help you with that strategy. We need to help you with that transition plan. Actually, coalition building is incredibly important and building consensus as well. So we, in particular, work with regulatory authorities as well to translate this. So we're publishing our first TCFD report. We're happy with it, but actually we want assurance on a lot of it as well, on the calculations. We've actually gone beyond the GHG protocol, which is a fun 900-page document. And because actually, carbon dioxide absorbed in UAE is different from the UK, for example. And this is where my environment and science background becomes, I won't talk you through my thesis on stage, but I'll WhatsApp you all individually. But it's very nice to have somebody you won't get us off stage, Olga. We'll be here for a few hours. But I think that's really important because actually, in PCAF, Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, you're graded on actually where the emissions data comes from. That's incredibly important to get right. So actually what we've started doing is industry coalitions with our clients and our geographies to share best practice, to say actually you're on this journey together. And we've mentioned consultancies, as Olga mentioned, I used it for my sins, used to work for a few consultancies as well. But actually sharing best practice across industries, sharing assurance best practice, ISSB is coming as well, is really, really required. And ISSB really absorbs TCFD, materiality approaches, but actually we need a greater understanding of materiality as well. So what's material to our business approaches? We need to educate, and we can't stop doing that. I'll pause right there.
So maybe just a few points to add. The first being that it can be quite daunting when you're asked to create your first climate transition plan. And it's really important to be able to break that down into something that's manageable. And I really applaud the efforts that GFANs have gone to in that regard. We used the guidance. We started small. We picked off our UK business first. For obvious reasons, given the leading role that the UK regulators have played in this space, and therefore have published a board-approved climate transition plan for the UK business. And that was a lot more manageable than trying to do it for the whole of the bank. We're nowhere near GIB, the size of HSBC, but being able to start in that aspect and then build up was really important because it just makes the task a whole lot more manageable. And having the guidance was incredibly useful, although still one or two gaps, which I will mention to you if you're interested. So I think that's the angle for us as an organisation thinking about transition planning. But as others have said, really it's about how you engage with your clients, and in our case, in the asset management business, our investee companies around transition. And we have a sort of hierarchy, a roadmap, if you like, of engagement with investee companies around climate. And that often starts with questions about materiality, data, importantly, for example, disclosing on CDP. And we know that in the MENA region, disclosure rates are very, very low relative to globally. 6% was a number I saw for the top 200 companies, which is about 80% of the market cap. Only 6% are actually disclosing data, which is often the precursor to then having a climate transition plan or target setting. So it's really tiny. So that's often the first question. But I think what's great about the transition planning framework is that it gives you another milestone to put into that investor roadmap, because before we had that, it was very much, have you disclosed your data on CDP? If people are applying the guidance, it does give you a nice checkbox. Normal for people to start with setting up the right governance. For incredibly busy people, it's often being done on the side of the desk. It's not part of their core role. And so we need to find a way to break that down. We need to find a way to incentivize people, to give them the space, to make it a part of their job, to recognize and reward those people who are going the extra mile and attending these trainings, giving and participating in them themselves. And that is an absolutely important mindset shift. And it links to the point at the top end of about linking executive remuneration with sustainability-related KPIs. It's exactly the same point, but trickling down through the organization. And I'm actually really pleased to see so many people here today at a capacity building session, because it's so important, and it's often something that we as employees
kind of do it as you go. So that's one approach. The other approach we found really effective and the most popular is peer-to-peer learning. So rather than hearing from people like us, you hear from, if you're a bank in Japan or you're a bank in the Middle East, you hear from another bank in Japan or another bank in the Middle East about how they've done it. And actually HSBC ran a really good program which we participated in with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority in the Greater Bay Area about training banks, peer-to-peer learning on transition planning, etc. So that's been another really effective tool. I just wanted to pick up on one other thing that Venetia mentioned, and then you can cut my other question. She mentioned the importance of corporates and real economy. So I can't really emphasize this enough. The banks on both together. That's not just on the transition planning side. That's also on the mobilizing capital side. We have two kind of core pillars of work: transition planning, mobilizing capital to emerging markets and developing economies. One of the biggest bottlenecks for increased investment in developing countries is actually
a lot to work out as we go. But also you can have a strategy and be implementing it with employment. So when we look at client transition plans as part of our engagement to achieve our goals, as part of our strategy, we're not looking for their document strategy. So there's a hell of a lot of work you've got to do to understand what each client is trying to achieve, draw out the transition elements, put them together into a view of their transition, and use that as the tool to say, hey, where are they heading? How fast are they going? Where are they up to? Waiting for them to have their document is, we could be that is global and is involved in the sector of the economy for that is. We have a lot of exposure across the energy sectors, and of course, in particular, you've got the most emitting parts of that, which is the power sector and the oil and gas sector. And HSBC, of course, as well, is very active in, the supply. And to the point, I think, which was made just a moment ago is, in many ways, that makes it difficult. Bankers who really know the energy sector or really know, most people are very a long history of understanding these sectors. We can add to that, though, newer expertise, and to build that demand for those fuels. And we're only going to do that when the demand for electric vehicles and the demand for renewables in the power sector and the demand for zero carbon solutions across industry, when these things are big enough that they start to have a material demand for fossil fuels, produce more from renewable energy and focus on those two things, the finance sector will follow and the capital is ready. And we will solve the bankability challenges ultimately the best we can. They're not unique to the net zero transition a lot of the time. But with the right policy signals, the capital is ready, I think.
Thank you very much. So,
very big change and is a good starting point for other regulations. Similarly, here in the UAE, we've now mandatory principles in relation to the Basel climate principles. And again, that has now been mandated immediately. In Saudi Arabia, likewise, there are significant pieces of work underway in order to develop the regulatory framework in Saudi Arabia. So the regulators are really starting to take action on that, which from a financial services perspective, absolutely will help.
A pathway, or you can subsidize the things you want to see grow. If we look at another energy transition that happened in the UK, the kind of effectively the carbon price of the EU and the UK combined just
Announced emissions for fossil fuels. Now, actually, you'd think, goodness, in Dubai or the Middle East, it should be far higher, but at less than 1%. And that's reflective of the Dubai economy, reflective of a lot of practices we're doing as well. And as we've gone on investor roadshows, and for us it's incredibly important to measure the finance emissions, have assurance on that as well. That was the one thing that captured so much attention. What we're seeing now is a lot of policies are playing catch up to what we'd already been doing for almost 10 years around transition planning. And it's no great secret that the Dubai economy is very diversified because the fossil fuels in Dubai were in short supply in comparison to Abu Dhabi as well. So actually we get
active all over the world. For a single regulator to decide, financial regulator to decide what the pathway should be is going to create huge problems and the potential for capital flow from east to west and from developing to developed economies, because there is a lensing effect that is just implicit to how everyone sees the world from their starting point. And when we're working with our colleagues in Asia, the perspective is different. Everyone gets the goal, but how you get there has to be different because the starting point is different. For example, if you've got a large state-owned power and utilities company, and they have a lot of coal in their operations today, and we're saying, well, what do we need to see for that transition to happen? We need a lot of renewables to be built, right? But if we have a story that says, well, they have to transition in a particular way that has any semblance of a European lens on it, then we're going to find ourselves in a position where we can't support that transition, where we have to exit that position because of the combination of them building renewable, how then you split that out regionally. And there's no right answer to it. And it's horrible moral hazard as well doing that, just by the way, because you have to start setting carbon budgets. The global carbon budget's an easy thing to optimize around, but splitting that by sector, splitting it by country, splitting it by company, you start to get into these horrible moral choices about who should get what. So nobody does it, which means when we apply those trajectories and apply that, we have to look at the shape of our business, how we want to impact our clients and work with our clients on transition, and therefore what that portfolio looks like, and build the right transition pathways for us with those long-term goals in mind. And it has to retain that flexibility. We do know that if you've got a very tight 1.5 degree budget, which of course is going to, on current trajectory, run out in 2027, 2028, there are certain things you need to be able to do. You need to be able to build a lot of renewables, roll out a lot of electric vehicles. You need to be able to reduce the demand for fossil fuels quite rapidly. But when you get beyond batteries are a great example. In a lot of power markets around the world, batteries are treated as both generation and load, which potentially means they're taxed twice, which ruins their economics. So regulations can be important, but I'd say financial regulations have got to be light enough touch to give us the flexibility.
Yeah, so it is pitching at the right level. It's exactly what Venetia said as well. I knew you were very passionate about this. That's why I started this question with Venetia. So I got it earlier. You don't like that level of indoctrination in the system.
I think I'm contractually obliged to defend the BNEF pathways, by the way, so.
The good thing is you're running out of time, so.
They're the best.
In the spirit of capacity building, you are all extremely accomplished, smart people and decision makers in your organizations. If I ask you to share one learning out of this COP that brings some optimism, can you share with us in the audience, what would that be? Sorry, that's on the spot. I see Vijay really thinking through it.
So I think the thing I've been most struck by with this COP is the sheer number of people who've engaged, both here in person and online around the world. And that fills me with great, it's great that we've got people here who've been doing this for 20 years, but I welcome the people who've been doing it for 5 minutes also, and who've been inspired by this to actually think to themselves, what can I do differently? So that's what I've been most struck by, and therefore my message to everybody is to walk out of this room and say, yes, I am going to do something differently from having listened to this, and this is my commitment to myself and to the planet.
I feel we all might say similar things, because I think the number of people I've heard just in passing discussing, when do you fly in, when do you fly out, how you get, is this your first COP? Yes, it's my first COP. And it does feel like there's just a huge number of people for this is the first experience. And I also want to make the point that I'm sure many people here are more familiar than I with, which is that it's only in the last few years this is what COP has become. You go back to pre-Glasgow, and you find it's much more top-down and much more government-focused and NGO-focused. Business is nowhere to be seen. You go back pre-Paris, and this is essentially governments not agreeing with each other for 2 decades. So the Paris Agreement gave us a bottom-up framework at a country level. Glasgow sort of invited business in, which is even more bottom-up. And so I think in the spirit of bottom-up, actually getting things done where it matters in the world economy and making progress versus talking about it, I think this is another great step forward. And I think if COP becomes this, keeps building on what it is becoming, more than just governments trying to agree it top-down, but everyone trying to agree bottom-up, we've got a much better chance of solving this.
In our space and the Climate Finance Hub, gentle plug, we're HSBCs as well as all of our clients of all our spectrums as well. 1, to have their corporate meetings, but 2, even retail banking clients as well. We've invited just a broader spectrum of society to come in and see us and understand what a COP is. And I think almost everyone has said this is their first COP, which is actually an amazing achievement. All COPs where you almost knew everyone, that's not a great achievement, actually. COP needs to be mainstream. Sustainability needs to be mainstream. So for us, actually, we had a registration. We stopped it on the second day because everyone was new. And that's incredible. We've seen children, and we've seen the elderly coming in. So that's incredible success. And also, for the last 6 months, we've been running listening sessions of what is a COP? What happens at a COP? What do you think comes out of a COP? You can't, capacity building, general plug as well, again there, at all levels of society as well, because we are on the
of adoption. Some of the things that we as GFAN said a couple of years ago that were very controversial, and we got a lot of criticism for, and just how widely accepted they are now. So two examples. One is the importance of the managed phase out of coal, but that requires investment into the coal. If you just leave it, specifically in Asia Pacific, where 80% of the coal-fired power, they'll just run, and you'll blow through your 2-degree budget, let alone your 1.5. So that was pleasing to see countries, governments from Europe, NGOs, activists, all now agreeing with this. And a similar topic is transition finance. The need for, in all of the scientific scenarios that BNF and others and the IEA produce, there's still a steel industry, there's still a transport industry. We're not going to get rid of those industries by 2050. We need to decarbonize them, but decarbonizing them is a massive capital expenditure. It's a huge investment, so they need more finance, not less. That is now really widely accepted by everyone, and the question is, how do we do that in a scientific, credible, robust way and have the transparency and rigor to know that that finance is being used for decarbonization? It's no longer a question of, oh, that's going to, giving those heavy emitting sectors is greenwashing, it's destroying the planet. No, okay, we need to decarbonize the whole economy.
Thank you very much, all of you, and all of you for joining us today, and the Capacity Building Hub for hosting us. I really appreciated all the insights and lots of conversations to follow up from all this. Thank you very much.